Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Defence Eye podcast. This week we're going to look at emerging lessons from the Iran war for military technology and the implications for the United Kingdom. I mean, we had a year ago, the Defence Review was published a year ago this week, had many recommendations for improvements and additions to the capabilities of the British Armed Forces. Are those recommendations out of date? Interesting question. But we'll look at some of the big things that have come out of the Iran war, and then we can fold into looking at how that is impacting on the recommendations of the Defence Review, the delays to the Defence Investment Plan, and how they may be incorporated in any future new improvements. Francis, what are the big takeaways you think are come out of this Iran war for air power, naval power, land power, missile technology, drone technology? What are the big things that stand out to you as being things Britain needs to incorporate or do or improve?
I would split it initially, and just at this moment, looking at air power, into offensive and defensive. What is quite badly understood is, especially the Israeli attacks into Iranian airspace, they're not led by F-35s. They're led by F-16s and F-15s. And we've seen, quite frankly, remarkable footage of 707 tankers operating in Iranian airspace literally 24 hours after the start of combat operations. And the issue here, and it comes to missile technology, is air-launched ballistic missiles and the ability to use those to take out as anti-area denial destruction, SEAD, air defense suppression weapons. They have been, we've sort of known about them, but until last year, not seen them consciously in operation. And their effect has been amazing. And it is a reminder that fourth gen aircraft, an appalling phrase, Lockheed Martin trademark, fourth gen aircraft are not combat ineffective. They still have an immense role to play. The Israelis prefer the F-15 to the F-35. They had the F-35 for free, so what's the problem? But if you're doing damage to an integrated air defense network, your F-15s are the aircraft that are doing damage. Right, so that's the offense side. Defense. I don't know about you, Tim. I've been actually shocked to see the number of reports and so forth of American, Italian, Kuwaiti, Saudi aircraft being hit on the ground, if not directly by drones and ballistic missile fragments, getting destroyed. And the Americans lost AWACSs and so forth, especially in Kuwait, losing, was it 3 Q-80 Typhoons and an Italian one? I think we all assumed these places were awash with hardened aircraft shelters. So how can you have these aircraft hit by fragments and drones? They're just pretty much out in the open. And the lesson that your airbase is not necessarily safe. And by the way, the ground-based air defences of all the Gulf states, possibly excluding Oman, are far in excess of, say, the UK. And you've seen these losses. I think there are some infographics suggesting that the US tankers, AWACS, Predators and whatever, has lost well over $1 billion of kit, alongside the various aircraft the Q-8 has shot down. So if we were to then map this onto the UK, I would hope someone, especially from the RAF, would be going around all the air bases, and God knows we don't have that many, and really assessing, are these bases hardened? And I would go back to the fact that certainly with the start, no-fly zones over North and South Iraq, the saying from the late 1990s was, RAF Marham is not the base. The base is Abu Ali Salem out in Kuwait. Marham is R&R, and it's where the post gets sent to. That is no longer the case. And basically, I think the UK, and this applies, by the way, to ports and to barracks and to storage areas, has got to start looking at, what if someone launched 15 drones against this airbase? What damage would they cause? And we've spoken about this. Home defence, as we would both know it, is still very much at the bottom of the list of UK MOD priorities.
I mean, we've also seen quite a lot of coverage of drones, and a lot of the coverage seems to be of the Iranian drone activity. We've seen, the Shahed drones attacking civilian targets, oil refineries, airports, that kind of thing. But there's lots of interesting reports coming out of the US, which says that their Reapers have been one of their main offensive platforms inside Iranian airspace. And they have been one of the main platforms they use to take out boats, aircraft on runways, cratering key parts of air bases. But they have a new mindset in the US Air Force where they are prepared to take 10, 20, 30% losses amongst their Reapers. And there's a recent call for a ramping up production of Reapers to account for that wastage rate. I mean, that is a new mindset that the Americans are engaging with, but certainly the European countries are not in that same space yet.
I would say certainly the further east you go from Britain, the mindset is there. But let's consider this. How many protectors has the UK bought? Is it 14?
16.
16,
like that.
fine. The US has lost more Reapers than that. What is interesting is if you go back to the current Chief of General Staff, General Sir Ailey Walker, he talks about his plans for the Army seeing this 20-40-40 split. 20% of the lethality delivered by old means, tanks, artillery, MICVs, what have you. 40% by throwaway drones, FPV drones, and 40% by high-end, either long-range attack drones or by UAVs that were survivable. And as you've just highlighted, actually, in contested airspace, you either have to pretty much destroy an integrated air defense network, which between them, the Israelis and the Americans have done a pretty good job, or you have to accept that your $20 million Reaper, you may get two or three flights out of it, but then it may be shot down. And to be fair, people shouldn't be surprised because the Ukrainians, they got the Turkish Bakhmatiar drones, and they had a honeymoon of about 6 weeks, and then they just started being shot out of the sky. So, I see Reapers largely, not exclusively, largely brilliant for counterinsurgency where you've not got an air defense threat. But if you've got an air defense threat, look, the Iranians have shot down Global Hawks flying at 30, 40,000 feet. We need to get out of the Iraq and Afghanistan mindset that the West owns the airspace. We don't. And the Iranians have shown, they've taken a hell of a lot of damage, but they've then also been able to trit unmanned systems.
Which is something that lots of people thought would happen, but now we have empirical evidence that it actually has happened. Now,
yes,
on the naval side, I've been quite interested in looking at the American naval embargo and how they've conducted it and their position of their fleet. And what's quite interesting is there is a lot of satellite imagery of the American warships at sea, and you're able to pinpoint their location. That's
and Chinese have been very, very quick to put their own satellite imagery out into public domain, which we can see as whether you want to call it asymmetric warfare, whatever. They've been very quick to put satellite imagery of lots of American ships out there. And gosh, might the Iranians be able to use that for targeting? Who knows?
But what is also interesting is that we saw on the first day of the war, 28th of February, the American naval headquarters and naval base in Bahrain being saturated with drones, and the main headquarters complex being really badly damaged. And this put out of action the ability of the Americans to use that base to resupply their fleet. So they've had to pull out all their logistics for their naval force out of the Gulf into the Indian Ocean and move it back to Diego Garcia, which is 2,000 miles sailing time from the blockade line. And you've seen quite a big flotilla of American logistics ships going back and forth from Diego Garcia to the Arabian Gulf, almost akin to the Pacific War of 1944-45, where they have sustained that blockade at the end of a really precarious supply line. Now, the Royal Navy has well-known troubles with its maritime logistics, and this is I'm pitching this as a big lesson from this war, that you can't rely on, much as you can't rely on air bases, you can't rely on shore naval bases anymore.
Absolutely, in spades. And again, I would come back to, for the sake of argument, adopting the wrong lessons from Iraq and Afghanistan, the belief that we will always own the skies. There is very little that our foes can do to prevent our freedom of action. We've seen, especially from Iran and the as yet relatively or inactive threat of the Houthis, with some quite, the Houthis, in inverted commas, are a terrorist group, yet they have the power to potentially close the Red Sea, by closing Bab el-Mandab, close the Suez Canal, and with massive economic effects on Western Europe, especially. And suddenly, one of the things that comes back is presence. Could you deal with resupply whatever with uncrewed systems? Actually, the answer is no, because they need to be protected. Well, could you have uncrewed surface vessels with surface-to-air missiles? Possibly, but actually with all the issues of support of those ships and whatever. So actually, it's reinforcing the fact that frigates and destroyers, even if you do see an increase in the number of uncrewed surface vessels, you still need frigates and destroyers. And by the way, how would an uncrewed surface vessel get to board a tanker whose provenance you don't know, hasn't got anything painted on the back saying, where it's registered? You can't do that with an uncrewed surface vessel. So, although the First Sea Lord, General Sir Gwyn Jenkins, has it's a valid ambition to see far more uncrewed systems in the Royal Navy, I think we are being reminded by the Iran war that the day of the crewed surface vessel is far from.
I mean, we've seen this with the US tactics in this blockade. They're really struggling to get frigates and destroyers onto that blockade line, and they're resorting to firing Hellfire missiles at the propellers and the rudders of tankers to try and disable them, rather than, because they can't get enough boarding parties there to cover all the access of routes into the Iranian ports. So they're resorting to this quite crude tactic to try and slow up the Iranian merchant ships.
And to be fair, certain reports are saying that the Iranians having to get loads of tankers to Karg Island to store oil, crude oil of various types, because they're not able to get it out of the Gulf. So it is Wellington and Waterloo's, was it, gentlemen, we're facing some hard pounding, let us see who can pound the hardest. So between the Iranians saying we will stop anything getting out of the Gulf and the Americans saying, and we will do the same, it's going to be a very interesting question to see who pounds hardest and gets the result. And at the moment, has to be said, the jury is out.
Well, moving on to our defence review, is it out of date question. I mean, a year ago this week, I think, they published the Strategic Defence Review. It had lots of ambitions for autonomous vehicles, hybrid air wings, all on production of munitions, drones, swarms, all that good stuff. And as we have reported several times on this podcast and on our online stories, the Ministry of Defence is plagued by indecision and an inability to finance any of these ambitions. So is there a danger that some of them might actually now be out of date by the time they actually come into service and get a solution?
Well, if you were to look at drones, and isn't it funny, Tim, we've both gone through unmanned air vehicles called drones. So, some of the systems in the late 1980s. Then in the 90s, being told sharply, they're not drones. They are unmanned aerial vehicles. And now we're back to drones. We're in the strange situation where both the Defence Secretary, John Healey, and the Defence Minister, Luke Pollard, when questioned about buying stocks of drones, be they recce, attack, FPV drones, they both use words to the effect of, I see, the problem is the technology is evolving so rapidly, if you bought some, then they're out of date by the time they're delivered. So it's better not to buy any at all. This is strange because this is not what is being adopted by pretty much any other European armed force, where they are accepting that, yeah, if you buy some FPV drones today, will their effectiveness only be 70% in 2 years' time? Yes, but at least you've got a stock. And the inability of the UK to buy at scale, let alone set up the always-on factories. And you mentioned about ammunition. They are about to start a competition for these 6 new munitions and energetic sites, leading to down selects later this year, possibly put on contract early in 2027. And, well, if you're Rheinmetall, you can build an energetics factory in about 6 to 7 months, from cutting turf to actually getting the first product out. Currently, this always-on munitions chain in the UK doesn't look as if it's going to be going anywhere or producing until 2028. And bearing in mind, the first plan for this was under Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in 2024, saying it's going to take 4 to 5 years to get this capability. That's pretty pathetic.
I mean, one of the also important lessons that's come out from this Iranian conflict, and also from the Ukraine war and the previous rounds of Israeli-Iranian missile barrages, is the importance of domestic sovereign manufacturing capacity for your air defense missiles and ammunition. Because up until now, what's the focus has been? We need to have loads of launchers of Patriot launchers, and no one paid very much attention to actually having a source of the missiles, and that has proved to be the crucial element in sustaining your air defense over a prolonged period.
Well, and to drill down yet further, the long pole in the tent is rocket motors, and Europe had sufficient rocket motor capability for the demand, and the demand was pretty low. But if you're suddenly saying, well, we used to have 8 batteries of this, with X hundred missiles for those, everyone is saying, yeah, we need to treble, quadruple, quintuple, and more the number of missiles we hold. That's going to be an interesting one with the Treasury, trying to say that holding stock, holding buffer, all this stuff is valid, because the Treasury will say, oh, it's evil. But what we have seen in Europe is countries, and even Denmark, Baltic states, especially Germany, Norway, they are all expanding rapidly their rocket motor capability. It's a bit like, pushing a car takes a great deal of effort to get it going, but once it's going, it should be okay. This effort started last year, and we are starting to see the fruits of it. Much in the same way as Europe is now out producing the United States in 155 artillery ammunition, I would say by the end of the year, actually surface-to-air missile production in Europe will have outstripped the US significantly. It's strange. Everyone assumes the US has this amazing industrial capability, a la World War II. They are struggling over Patriot production. And, this aim of getting 2,000 rounds a year by 2030, hey, may well happen, but getting to 600 rounds a year has proved, to put it mildly, problematic. But in the UK, have we seen, as I say, the 6 energetics munitions factories, which in an ideal world, if you had a Rheinmetall type organization after Rishi Sunak announced this is what we're going to do, they would have been producing raw material feedstock and rocket motors and warheads by the end of 2024. So we are, 18 months later and nowhere.
I mean, the underlying premise of the Defence Review was the continued Anglo-American special relationship, and this underpins several of the major procurement decisions. And we've now seen over the past 3 months that status unraveling to a certain degree. I mean, are we seeing a move, any indications of a move to a more independent British defence procurement policy than we had a year ago?
The answer is the old Facebook one. It's complicated. Probably dates me far too much. We have lots of brave words about defence as an engine for UK growth. Most recently, Defence Secretary John Healey has been saying that, taxpayers' money should go into British companies providing British jobs and then British products and so forth. But then you get announcements to buy small diameter bomb for F-35B, which will have no UK jobs, no UK work share. And I'm told that actually the SDR team were told they couldn't address Anglo-American relations. They had to just accept it was the bedrock. At a time when everyone else across Europe are going, you can't rely on the United States anymore. It is no longer a reliable ally. Okay, has Europe had its role to play in making America an unreliable ally? Yep, absolutely. But you would be a fool if you say the fundamental basis of our defense is the United States, because not just with the current incumbents in the White House, but actually some of the likely future incumbents, when you go, hello, Article 5, and they go, what's Article 5? You will be stuffed. I know from countries like Finland and some of the Baltic states, their defense planning assumptions, and actually Finland, even when it was neutral, they sort of knew that if war broke out with Russia, the Americans would come along. And so their one was sort of, we must be able to fight on our own for 60 days. And after 60 days, the Americans will be there and that'll be fine. And over the last couple of years, the 60 days has become 90 days and has become 120 days because they're just going, we can't guarantee this. And you're absolutely right. SDR doesn't really address this whole one of what it means to be sovereign. And quite frankly, look, can the UK have a totally independent capability in every area? Absolutely not. The cost would be prohibitive. And if you want sort of an example of the balances you have to do, look at France and AWACS. They are buying the Swedish Saab GlobalEye AWACS. It will be built in Sweden using a Canadian business jet. The French were quite roughly told, don't tinker with it because the cost will be ridiculous. Buy the product we got. And the French went, yeah, okay, that's what we have to do. So you have to fight your battles where you can. Quite frankly, artillery ammunition, rocket motors are relatively easy to be sovereign in, and then missile integration. Some of the other areas, you're just going to have to weigh things up. And I think if you look across Europe, the UK has options where it can substitute American products for European ones. Just one set of examples, and it's not exclusive. When the UK went for rivet joint, Eland SIGINT aircraft back in the early 2010s, there were no realistic alternatives. It was rivet joint or exit. Actually, at the moment, you now have about 5 European equivalents. French program, German program, Italian program, Swedish program. Rivet joint is yesterday's news, and I would be gobsmacked if, when we have a break-free clause, we continue with rivet joint rather than opting for one of the European programs. US defense industry is only very slowly waking up to the fact that President Trump said, hey, you guys have been, riding on our coattails, get your act together. And actually, quite quietly, Europe has got its act together, not in every area. And US companies are suddenly going, oh, does that mean we won't be able to sell? The answer is, yeah, you won't.
Well, this brings us on to the as you call it, the elephant in the room, the actual DIP. Has the Iran war speeded up, increased the pressure on the government to actually pull this rabbit out of a hat? Because it's been drifting for months and months and months. So is the pressure of a real war actually forcing them to do something? We hear lots of rumors it's going to be next week or the week after, but there seems to be pressure ahead of steam to actually bring something out. I mean, John Healey's now talking about it coming out before the NATO summit first week of July, which is three or so weeks away. So has the Iran war put the pressure on them?
Put simply, no. If the Iran war had put pressure on the UK government to do anything, although welcomed by the army to buy the Boxer RCH, get a full contract going. No, basically there should be massive contracts with MBDA and Thales and others to buy hugely enhanced stocks of surface-to-air missiles. UK PLC would be also looking at anti-aircraft artillery, stocks in the tens of thousands of anti-drone interceptors. We bought some, but I gather if it's even in the thousand, it's not even 5,000. So the Iran war has, the reaction has been, phew, we got away with it. Akrotiri wasn't flattened. We didn't lose, typhoons in Qatar and so forth. So, hey, fine, nothing happened, situation normal. I and you both know there is no urgency. Iran should have been forget the fighting Russia in 2030. We may get involved against our will, doesn't matter, in a regional war with Iran far sooner than that. Have we got stocks of missiles, especially, and other expendables? And we don't. And okay, there was an order, was it 42 million for Martlet, top-ups on Martlets? So that's a good few hundreds of rounds. But I'm told one of the problems is, despite Thales saying, buy now to secure your delivery slot, there are a significant number of customers in front of the UK who are going to get their weapons and we will have to wait longer. So I don't detect any urgency in the British government, especially as a result of the Iran war, to say, right, look, DIP, yeah, brilliant process, but in the meantime, we need to order X, Y, Z, ABC. There has been no such urgency. To the contrary, things, as you said, have drifted. If defense was a color, what color would it be? So there's been no urgency. You sort of say, well, before the NATO summit. I think one thing to get over is if John Healey turns up at the NATO defense ministers summit, 18th June, and there is either not a defense investment plan or one that is so vague and it just sort of talks about capabilities but has no figures, he is going to get such a kicking. It'll be unbelievable. And if the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, if he turns up at Ankara in early July without a DIP or with one, as I've said, which is really vague, he is also going to be kicked by pretty much everyone. And I suspect he won't like what will happen to him from President Trump. And there will be very little he can do to buy President Trump off. This is the stake we've got to. My talks with diplomats in the UK and other parts of Europe, they're just saying, hey, look, we've published our equivalents of DIP. We've published our equivalents of defense resilience and so forth. And by the way, defense resilience in the UK is pushed now into 2027. And they're going, why can't you guys do this? And in conversations this week with European diplomats, and they said, by the way, we have either frozen or cut welfare, education, health to fund defense. Why can't you do it? And they are bemused and increasingly annoyed by Britain's different. We do things differently, and you have to accept that we have our processes. And they're going, well, it's the same for all of us. And NATO, collective defense. And, the UK is slipping. Even if it was in the first division, I would say we're at the bottom of the first division in terms of defense. And the bookies aren't taking bets on whether we'll be relegated.
When you get in the relegation zone, that's the time where you sack the manager and hire a new one. That's maybe not the analogy that Keir Starmer will like at this point in time.
Anyway. Comment on Times Radio this morning, Adam Bolton was on the breakfast programme, and they were mulling over all the political things, and he got raised about the defence investment plan. And Adam Bolton said words to the effect of, can a zombie actually commit suicide? Which I thought was a quite telling comment.
That interesting thought. We will bring this edition to a close. Hopefully in 2 weeks' time, when we come back for our next edition, we'll be able to discuss the DIP and find out what's actually in it. Maybe we won't. Maybe we will. It's the Twilight Zone. So thank you, Francis. And we'll be back with more insights in the coming weeks.